Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here of the Liberty Weekly podcast. Welcome back. This is episode number 135. And as always, the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/135. And I am joined again by Keith Knight. How you doing?
Always good, Pat, to be back. I'm glad we are taking a break from politics today, especially during this election. I am just exhausted. How are things going with you?
Oh, good. It was a busy week, but it was a down week. And yesterday I was able to get a whole bunch of work done around the house. But there's still work that needs to be done. But I figured, there's only this so much of a well of energy from which you can draw. And so I was going to take it easy today and then hit it again next weekend. But how about you?
Opportunity cost, baby. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? I have just been doing a lot of online work. Need to get back into the manual labor now that it's not 3,000 degrees in Arizona anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's starting to get below freezing here. So, well, in our last episode, we touched on this topic a little bit, but you had reached out to me, I think, earlier this week with a little bit of an idea from left field. So, what was your idea?
Well, I'm just so sick of only talking about, the state or something when I, of course, love it as a topic for our show, but you want to make sure the thing that you hate doesn't also indirectly control you just by obsessing over it. So I thought we would go over uh, something vitally important in life, and these are the top 5 regrets of the dying. This is from Mindful's interview with Bronnie Ward, the author of The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. For more info, visit mindful.org/no regrets. No regrets. So, yeah, I figured we would go through these 5 just so they were out there because I came across them in Dave Rubin's book and I go, well, these are 5 quick things that everyone should have on hand easily just so they know that there was an in-depth study about people who were towards the end of their life and they had 5 little gems of wisdom. I figured you and I could discuss just discuss them one at a time here. The first one, top 5 regrets of the dying. One, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think you're able to do that? Because it's harder than it sounds.
Yeah, it's really hard, and I think it takes a lot of courage, and it's something that I've tried in my life. Especially as now that I'm towards the latter end of my 20s. I guess I'm 27 years old, but especially since we had my son, time has started to go a lot faster, it seems like. And so this kind of introspection happens whether you, I don't know, it just kind of creeps up on you. So in starting a career and everything like that, I try to analyze, and I try not to spend too much time in the past and wonder why I took the career path I did and made the choices I did, because now it's a little bit too late. I have that feeling. I don't know if do you have those feelings ever?
Well, I sometimes am doing something and I go, hold on, do I have a very solid foundation for my reasoning behind doing this? Because that is the reality, as she says, not the life others expected of me. That just by other people expecting something, it's not even like, well, there's a law and you go to jail if you don't do this. Like, we expect you to do this. That puts so much pressure on us
It does.
psychologically that it's like, I don't want to disappoint them because that'll be over in 30 seconds, but that's so bad that I'm just going to do this thing for years on end just so I don't have to, this way I could just avoid this conflict or not run into this terrible conversation that I might have to with a peer of mine. I mean, you look, my dad one time said to me, he's like, son, the day you graduate college, I'm going to be so proud. And I go, Dad, uh, all the people you watch on CNN went to college. They're all either liars or morons. I go, the fact that that alone is what really inspires you. I go, well, why don't you just try to see if I can think consistently or something like that? Or instead of having your own standards, you're constantly going to, well, what's popular, what's widely accepted. And it's amazing that our ability as human beings to think rationally, to read, to weigh costs and benefits, we just totally abandon for, I hope I'm liked by the masses.
Yeah, it's definitely illogical. And especially I guess for me, the and in my thoughts, a lot of people in the audience probably can relate to this. I keep forgetting, Keith, that you're younger than I am, but the burden of potential is something that's really hard. And I guess I assume about our audience is that, you're ANCAPs, you're interested in intellectual pursuits. So I guess my assumption would be is that you also have a lot of academic or professional potential if you just harnessed it properly. But it's a really hard thing to try and live up to. And I've read Jordan Peterson and tried to apply his works to my life too, but there's a certain amount of anxiety that comes when, as you get older, he always talks about order versus chaos, and chaos is the potential of a life that you could live and perhaps the life that you should be capable of living in terms of succeeding. But as you get older, that chaos of potential gradually goes away and it turns into the order because you've chosen your path and now you're walking down it. And so it's interesting.
Yeah, I am trying to think of a time where I, I forget what age this was. So my mom is a tutor and an educator, reading specialist, has a PhD and everything. So she was so hard on me when I was younger. And as I say it, it doesn't sound like much being so hard on me to get good grades. But when you're in like first grade or something, and it's all about, well, what did the teacher say? It's like this is the ultimate authority. When that's all you think it's the biggest thing in life. It's like, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Well, let's see what the teacher says. Okay, turns out the teacher was a moron the entire time.
Right.
So the fact that I had put so much stress on myself for something that it didn't even matter, more or less. Um, and not only in first grade, it, followed me and I'd be so stressed. Oh, I didn't get the grades. I didn't do A, B, and C. Instead of ever asking for an independent justification as to why I should listen, why do you deserve my time instead of someone else? I mean, that's a totally fine question you should be asking at any age. And if it's so obvious why they're deserving of your time, well, surely then you'll have an answer. So simply just having objective or personal standards for things can really make sure you're not living the life others just expect of you, and living a life true to yourself. Do you have any final thoughts on? I'd wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
I think that when you're going through your life, you should certainly take a lot of time to self reflect and think about why you're making the choices that you are and not let yourself get swept up in the moment and just make those choices. Because once you choose a path to go down, this gets a lot harder to do. Thinking of, okay, well, if I get married, yeah, I walk down a certain road, maybe I could turn around. It's going to be a big hassle. You have a child, then all of a sudden you have a family and a responsibility of your own. And on some level, you have to do what's expected of you. You can't just, oh, let's take the family up. We're going to move across the country and go live in the woods because I want to be a prepper, Um, I suppose you can do that, but, or, oh, I don't think that I want to be an accountant anymore. I want to pursue my passion for painting. Well, you should have thought of that before you chose to have a family. And that's maybe my only last take on that. So when you're making these decisions, think a lot about it and make sure that that's what you want to do. Find yourself.
Definitely long term thinking. Top five regrets of the dying. Number two, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Yeah, this is a good one because it assumes not just hard work, but hard work not for the sake of the labor. So if you're working really hard on climbing Mount Everest and your dream is to climb Everest, or then that's something totally justified. But if you're doing it as a means to an end, and you're so focused and obsessed with the means, you end up forgetting about the end, which is happiness, fulfillment, friendship, a sense of achievement, ability to do other things, ability to get recognition. Sometimes I will see that I'm working so hard on something and I totally forget why I even started it, or I, end up losing the justification. I have to do A so I could do B so I could do C. There's that. Oh God, I wish I could remember where I read this one. There's the old, story of a guy who just goes. it spends a few hours fishing, eats a fish, and then takes the rest of the day off in the forest. And someone comes up to him and says, "Hey, what do you do all day?" He goes, "Well, I get up, I cook myself breakfast, I live with my family, we have a great time, I go fish, and then I drink wine and we sit around and laugh." And he goes, "Well, don't you know that if you postpone consumption and you increase your ability to catch fish, you could get more boats, you could hire more employees, and you could be everywhere in the world producing all this stuff?" And he goes, "Well, why would I do that?" And he goes, "Well, this way you could sleep in, get up, talk to your family, and at night have enough time to settle down." He ends up saying, if you do a ton of work, you could have the very same thing you have now. Now, thank God there are the productive people in the world who are very ambitious and give us tons of access to products, but at the same time, don't let it come at the expense of actually achieving what makes you happy.
Yeah, I mean for sure. I see this all the time. My my dad and my family was always it was always a work hard, play hard kind of thing, and I think that's a good way to go about it because you never really. I remember, we would always go on vacation, and my parents had a big jug of coins that they always kept where they would always put their change in the jug. And then so when we would go on vacation, the jug of coins always got brought out, and it was a big thing in our family that we would go to the bank with the jug of coins, and we would see how much there would be money that would be budgeted just to blow on vacation. It's like, okay, well, we're going to go on vacation. This is why we work so hard. So we're going to have a blast and we're going to go on vacation. And I think that's always a good way to live your life. But at the same time, I'm not sure. Well, I don't know if you grew up in a more conservative household. I think we had talked about this before, but I'm just not remembering. But there was always that hard work, and my parents always led by example with it. And in a way, that was also the angst of living up to expectations. But there was always that playing hard too. Is that how you grew up, Keith?
There's an interesting dynamic where it's almost like the horseshoe theory again. It's like the conservatives are all about hard work, and then it's less about hard work, and then you get up to the left, like Noam Chomsky just said the other day. Being a leftist is about being a constant political activist all
Yeah.
year round, not just during election season. Oh my God, we got to be totally obsessed with politics all the time. We can never just enjoy something. Um, yeah, I definitely had the sort of puritanical mindset, I think is the correct word. If I'm not, make sure to grill me in the comments. But it's just like the idea that work in and of itself is good. Hey, you work today, right? It's like, well, for what? Did I produce something of value? Well, then it's good. Just the idea of, I'm working versus I'm not working. Well, that's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily yield us a better result. Sometimes there's such thing as too much work. Sometimes there's, why are you wasting your time on that? Well, at least I'm working. No, that's an opportunity cost right there. You're
Yeah.
not doing something you otherwise would do. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Yeah, that reminds me of a time when I had a friend who was just like, terrible position. He would be like, "Hey man, if you ever need someone to talk to, just let me know." And I said, "Oh, thanks." And then he said the same thing to me like three more times, and I go, "Do you need someone to talk to? Because you've said this to me three times in the last week." Go, "Can we go to Starbucks after school?" And then we met there. Starbucks closed. We go into his car and keep talking. We ended up being there like, I think we were there for like 12 or 13 hours, just talking straight, and it was so cool. And the whole time, my mom is texting me, "Like, Gavolt, when are you gonna be home for school tomorrow?" You would have thought they were giving away winning lottery tickets at school the next day. This was the most important. It was just another school day. Meanwhile, this guy is in a terrible position, totally depressed. And it's like, I shouldn't work so hard. This is something, it's okay if I miss that because this is so obviously more important. Other day I was really tired, but I still was close to one of my relatives, so I still went and stopped by and visit him. And in like 30 minutes, I just got like this second wind of energy, and I was there. I haven't been out of the house for this long since March, and this whole thing started. I was like, oh my God, I've never been out of the house this long. I'm exhausted. So yeah, not working too hard. Any final adages or ideas on I wish I hadn't worked so hard?
Yeah, and I think one thing I've noticed, because I never really had a full-time job until I graduated law school, which is in of itself, I worked part-time and I went to school at the same time, so I guess you could say that was full-time, but not like a real, I guess, adult job. And I started to notice that it's like the marginal utility. When you don't have so many free days, the free days that you do have become much more valuable, and you need to take the time to really enjoy it and try to cherish it. So when you're not working hard, I guess I would leave on that. Make sure you cherish those days off and make a thing out of it. And it's all about transitioning from level to level. You come up to the work mode and you work hard. You kind of come down when you come home from work, but then on the weekend you come down to the recreation mode, and then you got to load up the elevator again to go back on Monday morning. But you try to grease the skids so that you can get to that level and then perform there.
I've had that where I was just like, oh, I'm so tired. I don't want to go to work. I can't wait till my next day off. It'll be so fulfilling. I'll be skipping through meadows and just be happy. Meanwhile, it's like sleeping in late,
Right.
scrolling on Twitter a little too more than I should. 5 or 6 episodes of Family Guy, three of which I've already seen, and after like 5 or 6 weeks of that, I go, this is so unproductive. I got to start having standards for my days off. So yes, wish I hadn't worked so hard. Top five regrets of the dying number three. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings.
Well, it's funny because I feel like on the podcast, it started as a vehicle for me to like self therapy, because I'm a verbal thinker. So I would get on and I do this with, well, Liberty Bigley. I've started doing a daily show at anchor.fm/Liberty Bigley. I'll put it in the links, but I do it just to get things off my mind or whatever, and so it's my daily podcast. But I feel like I tend to overshare, so this maybe isn't my big one. What about you?
you know, uh, it depends on oversharing versus sharing accurately, because sometimes I will talk to someone who I'm just either so pissed at or I'm so appreciative of. And you really shouldn't have to wait till you're speaking at someone's funeral to tell them how much you appreciate them. It's like I hear that all the time with I should have written down an example. Um, where it's like, we really appreciated this person for all this and that, and I go, so did you ever mention this to them when they were alive? No. People today that that can hear you and respond, do you say this to them? Oh no. So this is more of a I don't want to be seen as weak or needing of someone else or admiring someone else. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly wish I had the courage to express some of my feelings. I mean, I'll talk to someone and get in a fight with them sometimes about something that the fight's not really about. One of them was, taking care of a dog, and the real fight was how she was such a liar and a thief. But I didn't want to mention that because I was too scared. So I'm just like so pissed at her about the dog watching. So yeah, I definitely wish I had the courage to at least not be terrified of what other people are going to say or how they're going to feel. I think if you just have a policy of constantly being honest, yes, you'll weed out some people, unfortunately, who are going to be afraid of that. But at the same time, you're going to attract people who value that, and they will come into your life in such a way that if you didn't have that honesty and courageous policy of saying what's on your mind or how you feel, they wouldn't have come in the first place.
Yeah, I guess I misunderstood the point of this question, because I feel like I often express my feelings to other people, but not when it's confrontational, perhaps. And that's what I think this is kind of getting at. But I think I when I was a teenager, I was always really into my own image. I think as a lot of teenagers are, and I would freak out about how I looked that day or whatever it was. And my dad was just this goon, and he can go in any situation and not give a rip about what other people think. And he's like, as you get older, it'll change and you'll stop caring what people think so much. And I think generally that's true. I'm just really there's things that are more important to me than what other people think, and it's liberating in a way. But moreover, I think I just got really tired of being concerned all the time, and now it's just like, letting go. It's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that has sort of liberated me from like being terrified of what people think. Well, there's two different aspects to this. If I'm in front of them and I'm talking with them, I'll ask them to defend their reasoning. Because the reality is, if you read the work of Robert Cialdini at Arizona State, people have like no reasoning for
Right.
99% of the things that they do, simply because the cost of really getting informed about whether or not this or that is worth it. It's like you'd have to spend thousands of hours researching a restaurant to know if it's safe, and looking at your alternatives and how long it'll take you to get there. You're going to starve to death finding this out. Just go to a place, it's probably okay. There's a big line out the door, yeah, that's probably an okay place. So when you realize that people just don't have a lot of reasoning, if I'm so insecure about people who don't have, a big, sack of evidence for why I should be ashamed about A, B, or C, it's like worrying. It's like Adele worrying about how a deaf person saying she has a bad voice. They don't have a valid opinion at all. They have no way of judging. So that, but as far as one thing I definitely need to work on is if I'm afraid that someone that I can't respond to is going to see me as stupid, I shy away from that. So a lot of this stuff is for me, really,
Yeah,
really.
I do that all the time with my show. Is I guess I try and preach, but I'm not preaching to the audience. I'm preaching to myself. Usually when that happens, I try to make it clear, but I don't know, if you listen to the show for a while, you probably know what I'm talking about.
I know it's like it's time for us to have courage. Hey, the guy that's owed you $10 for 3 months. Have you brought that up to him? No. That's gonna start a fight. Oh, come on! Don't tell me you're gonna violently resist the tyranny of dictators. But it's like, this guy's gonna roll his eyes at me, and that's gonna start something.
Yeah, or like with this episode, I mean, I think we were both talking about how we're a lot better at following the lessons from this episode in recent times, but I mean, back before I took kind of a hiatus for a while, I was saying like libertarianism is not the most important thing. You got to live your other life, but meanwhile, I'm spending 6 hours a week listening to libertarian podcasts and podcasting for an hour. And getting pissed off at TV and all that stuff. And quick aside before I forget, I remember growing up and listening, my parents would listen to Rush Limbaugh when we were in the car. And there was one point when they both definitively stopped. And they were like, you know what? We don't like the people that we are when we listen to Rush Limbaugh. Not because he's Rush, but, you know, they'd get so mad about it. And I'm sure, they were less informed when they stopped listening about it, but they were certainly happier.
Yeah, you have to know about unproductive energy. I mean, we could just list off the people in Yemen who have been murdered and go through every tragedy of their life. That's just unproductive at some point. I mean, it's turning on the news. There were more deaths today. Really, in a
Right.
world of 7 billion people, there I'm gonna need to see evidence. I don't believe anyone died. Yeah, it's like, yeah, but if you constantly are spreading yourself with that, it's almost like it takes you over in
Yeah.
such a way that's counterproductive. But I mean, it's still amazing, just the whole libertarian thing about everyone believes in this thing called the state, and there's no good arguments for it, and the smartest people can't admit they're wrong, and they change the subject. So it is a wild thing that's worthy of a lot of time, just because it's mind blowing. Everyone since forever's believed in something there's no evidence for. There's no good arguments in favor of. It's a contradiction by definition. So when you see that, it's almost worth it, but not at the expense of letting it totally ruin your life. Final thoughts on I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings.
Nope.
Number four, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends.
That one's really big, and I'm not very good at this one. I
I know
Yeah.
it's something that it's like uh, you can so easily keep putting off, but if so many people in this study, there were a large number of participants and a great deal of research. And a lot of people that I talk to who are older, it's like, oh, it's so important to stay in touch. They value really calling you, but you're sort of like in this cats in the cradle scenario where it's like, I'm too busy now. I'll get a hold of this later. and then you end up being the person who's trying to seek out those relationships later. If so many people believe it, it's probably something I'm not just able to properly value in my head, because I could just easily put it off. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. Are you are you just totally terrible? Do you ever give it a shot?
I do sometimes. It's like there will be chance encounters around town where I'll see someone I went to high school with that I still really like and want to see, and they live very close, and there's no reason why we don't do something. But I think we're both just antisocial homebodies, and so two ships pass in the night. Or, like my cousin and I, my second cousin lives less than 2 or 3 miles from me now. We moved in a couple years ago, and I've seen them 2 or 3 times. And actually, the first time we saw them since we moved in was actually my wife ended up pregnant. So I don't know if that what I was trying to. It was just we were, having a good time, and anyways, oversharing. But
You guys should come into town more often,
I know
please.
it's a joke amongst us that I guess I wanted to tell on Liberty Weekly. So
Yeah, it's funny because there's sometimes where it's like I'll want to reach out to someone, but I'm like, well, it's been a while, and I wonder what they're gonna think of. I was just thinking of them. Like, is that such a vulnerable position that I can't admit that? Oh, they crossed my mind, or I will. I'll be thinking of I wanted to hang out with someone, so I'll put it off. And then more time goes by, which makes it even harder, increasing my original justification for, well, it's been a long time. Well, it just keeps getting longer. Um, it is incredible how we'll sort of have like this grass is always greener mindset with so many things in life, but this especially where it's like originally it was, excuse me, it was, well, my brother lives thousands of miles away and, it's such a hassle that I'm not going to see him. The reality is that Skype and Zoom exist. We both have access to the internet. I could still talk to him all the time. So then he moves to Tucson, Arizona. And I'm like, well, that's, good, but it's still a long drive and everything. And then he moves again. And now he is so close to me, I could be at his house in 20 minutes. He's gone from thousands of miles to I could be there in, before lunch today. And I'm just disappointed in myself that I don't go to see him enough. I think a lot of it is that if someone tells you they're busy or they're not able to do it once or twice, I just stop asking. I go, all right, I'm not going to beg you, because sometimes you have to be willing to say there might just be some people who aren't that into spending time with me.
yeah, or and it's always important for me. It's always the busyness, or oh, we've done things for the last 3 weekends, and the weekend that you want to do something would be 4 or 5 in a row. So whatever. I mean, I don't blow people off or anything like that, but it's tough. It's tough to schedule that, especially with a young family. But it is very important, and every time it happens, I almost always walk away feeling great about it, like refreshed. You get the warm and fuzzies inside your body, and you feel good. So just do it.
And isn't that funny that we have to say, what am I going to think afterwards? You have to put yourself in that mindset because I mean, I, uh, I'm sure it might have happened once or twice where I've left and I'm like, God, that was a nightmare. I shouldn't have done it. But I don't remember a time like that. I do know that even last night when I went up, it was, 20 miles out of my way, but I still went to see him. And I go, I'm at least going to stop in. Hey, how's work? How's this? All right, I got to get back before dinner. And I ended up staying for 10 hours. I mean, literally, it was like midnight and I'm yawning walking out of there. So you have to try to be able to think past. There's the amount of friction calling them, driving there. And once you're there, it's usually really good. Sometimes to see if the other person values your friendship, you can really just say, "Here are my next 5 days off. Name any time, and I'll work around them." Now, if you give them five 5 days to choose from, and they might say, "Well, I'm on vacation. How about this day?" If they don't do that, then you got to move on.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
unfortunately,
Well, in
that was a sad reality I had to embrace.
that kind of begs another topic is, you know, same thing with family. You should probably stay in touch with family, except sometimes there's toxic relationships and you got to know when to cut it off. But if things, every family has problems, and you need to know where to draw that line between toxic and normal problems that people have, and are they worth working through. You got to make that decision for yourself. But I think it is generally, as a general rule, very important to stay in touch with your family and craft those relationships, and for a reason that we'll find out in the second half of the program here today.
Coming up very shortly, number 5, top 5 regrets of the dying. I wish I had let myself be happier. This one I put a little thought into. When you hear, I wish I had let myself be happier, what comes to mind?
That I've heard it described to me this way is that our there's a lot about our emotional and mental state that is very ancient and primordial. They talk about the lizard brain, and fight or flight goes into almost everything. Maybe this is freshman psychology, which I think it is. But fight or flight goes into it so much that when you view stress and when you view stressors in the world as an attack on you, it instigates the fight or flight response. And when you do that, you're constantly your blood pressure is high, you're agitated, you're stressed, you're feeling those stress emotions. But when you view stress as something that is an opportunity or a challenge, some of that still activates, but instead of working against you, it's kind of like your fuel. So if you have a big project, if you see it as an attack on you, well, then yeah, you're going to be stressed out and all that kind of stuff. But if you view it as an opportunity and you voluntarily accept the stress, then you can use that as a pool to go forward. And this is where it relates, is that if you are constantly in a state of being attacked, your body by nature only notices threats, because when you meet a bear in the woods and you're running away, well, you're not going to stop and say, hey, look, those flowers are really pretty today. You're going to be like, holy crap, there's a bear behind me. And you're going to be looking out for, a bite on the leg, or a swoop of some claws or something like that. The same way, when you are stressed and anxious and not in a good place mentally, constantly in the fight or flight response, you're not going to stop to notice the beautiful things in life. And that's the very core of this number 5. I wish that I had let myself be happier. So you need to find a way to not be in that fight or flight all the time. You need to voluntarily accept the challenges that come forward at you, because when you do that, something happens and you start to notice, like, holy crap, today's an awesome Sunday. The sun is outside. I really enjoy it on, 4 p.m. when I'm with my family and we're all in the kitchen, and okay, yeah, I'm doing dishes, but my son is running around and laughing. Or I come home from a long day at work and he runs at me and he's so excited to see me. You start to notice how wonderful that is. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, being able to just stop, sit back, and say, is this really worth getting pissed off about? I mean, really, there are some genuine things worth getting pissed off about, and punishing people and excluding them from your life. So just make sure that you have some legitimate standards. I mean, because a lot of things could be rather trivial when you look at them in the retrospect. Like, I do see this with a lot of parents, and I started just calling it out when I see parents doing it with their kids, even if they're. I even did it to a stranger once at the store, and I go, "Is that big of a deal? I mean, scale of 1 to 10. I'm just curious about you. Tell me what you think. 10, life threatening. 1, just the smallest thing possible that you need to let go. Where is this on the scale? Just to at least get them thinking of, is it worth the hollering and screaming and cussing about? Because think of what you're doing. You're decreasing the likelihood that the kid is going to feel comfortable around you, talk to you when they're in their teen years and going through trouble. I don't know the biology behind, teens tending to be very distant, not talking a lot, and being isolated from their family members, but maybe it has something to do with they were so heavily judged and it was so difficult to talk to their parents that they were less likely to. We certainly had a wide range of that. I mean, when I had some of my friends in, high school or college tell me, yeah, my best friend's my mom, my best friend's my dad, I was like, wow, what? it's just so weird to sometimes think of. Not because I was ever anti my mom or my dad or really didn't like them. I just thought of them more as the person who keeps me in line and could get me in trouble, as opposed to someone as a steward to help you through life, and someone to sort of prepare you for the path of things that come afterwards. So I don't have too much I don't have too much wisdom on this, but you sent me an interesting video that we'd like to go over. Tell us about the 1938 Harvard Happiness and Healthy Study.
Yeah, so in this study, it's the longest running study of happiness or what makes people happy in, I think, the history of the world. And there's a really awesome TED talk on it. And I was wondering, well, first I'll introduce it. But so they followed, I don't know, 700 and something young men from two different groups. And one group was from, I think, like a very wealthy private school in New York City, and they followed a bunch of those students throughout their lives. And another group was a bunch of kids from the slums and tenements in Boston, I think it was. And they also followed them throughout their lives. So every year they would have them submit to a battery of tests and questions, and they would take footage of them communicating with their family, and they would analyze it and see where people ended up. And some people ended up being alcoholics, and some people ended up being incredibly successful. Others went from having nothing to the top to having everything, and others went from the top of social strata way down to the bottom. And so some of the things that they found are very interesting, and I'm going to share the screen here, and hopefully this is all going to work very well because we tested it last time and we worked out the kinks. So let me know if you can't hear this, Keith. Here is what they found.
What are the lessons that come from the tens of thousands of pages of information that we've generated on these lives? Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. We've learned three big lessons about relationships. The first is that social connections are really good for us and that loneliness kills. It turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well connected. And the experience of loneliness turns out to be toxic. People who are more isolated than they want to be from others find that they are less happy, their health declines earlier in midlife, their brain functioning declines sooner, and they live shorter lives than people who are not lonely. And the sad fact is that at any given time, more than 1 in 5 Americans will report that they're lonely. And we know that you can be lonely in a crowd and you can be lonely in a marriage. So the second big lesson that we learned is that it's not just the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationships that matters. It turns out that living in the midst of conflict is really bad for our health. High conflict marriages, for example, without much affection, turn out to be very bad for our health, perhaps worse than getting divorced. And living in the midst of good, warm relationships is protective. Once we had followed our men all the way into their 80s, we wanted to look back at them at midlife and to see if we could predict who was going to grow into a happy, healthy octogenarian and who wasn't. And when we gathered together everything we knew about them at age 50, it wasn't their middle-aged cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And good, close relationships seem to buffer us from some of the slings and arrows of getting old. Our most happily partnered men and women reported in their 80s that on the days when they had more physical pain, their moods stayed just as happy. But the people who were in unhappy relationships, on the days when they reported more physical pain, it was magnified by more emotional pain. And the third big lesson that we learn about relationships and our health is that good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains. It turns out that being in a securely attached relationship to another person in your 80s is protective, that the people who are in relationships where they really feel they can count on the other person in times of need, those people's memories stay sharper longer. And the people in relationships where they feel they really can't count on the other one, those are the people who experience earlier memory decline. And those good relationships, they don't have to be smooth all the time. Some of our octogenarian couples could bicker with each other day in and day out. But as long as they felt that they could really count on the other when the going got tough, those arguments didn't take a toll on their memories. So, this message that good, close relationships are good for our health and well-being, this is wisdom that's as old as the hills. Why is this so hard to get and so easy to ignore? Well, we're human. What we'd really like is a quick fix, something we can get that'll make our lives good and keep them that way. Relationships are messy and they're complicated, and the hard work of tending to family and friends, that's not sexy or glamorous. It's also lifelong. It never ends. The people in our 75-year study who were the happiest in retirement were the people who had actively worked to replace workmates with new playmates. Just like the millennials in that recent survey, many of our men, when they were starting out as young adults, really believed that fame and wealth and high achievement were what they needed to go after to have a good life. But over and over these 75 years, our study has shown that the people who fared the best were the people who leaned into relationships with family, with friends, with community. So what about you?
Yeah, so very interesting there. And a lot of that is what we've been talking about. I mean, any thoughts on that, Keith?
Especially what he said about, us wanting a quick fix. It's so hard to develop that low time preference of, all right, this will make me really happy now. It's like, oh God, I'd love to, have a big glass of, Captain Morgan and Coca-Cola. It's like, all right. But then I get really hungry when I drink, so I'm going to eat late. So I'm going to have, and then I'm going to start craving chewing tobacco. So then I'm going to do that. I won't get to bed till 2. I do have to be up by 7. I'll be exhausted. I won't be on top of my game the next day. It's like, hold on. This Captain Morgan better be the most delicious, greatest thing ever if it's worth all this other stuff. So it is about, being able to see all right, if I do this, then that will happen. So, spending the extra time to develop relationships, it seems to certainly pay off in the long run. So I really like what he said about that, mostly because it's something I need to embrace more.
How damning is this of the COVID lockdown?
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, certainly, and there's something so different about being in person. There's some people in my life that I'm like, yep, Skype is enough. I
Yeah.
don't need to see you in person. Other people I'm like, oh, we've only spoken on Skype. I need to save up and get a flight out, just because it's just so much more real. It's so much more intimate. It's so much more fun to literally walk through the rooms in their house as they're telling you where they live and stuff. So yeah, it's devastating for the lockdown. Certainly not as devastating as my recent interview with Jeffrey Tucker, where he slams them down. But this certainly gives us an idea as to the cost. That's one of the biggest swindles that you come across, is when someone tells you, here's a solution. No such thing as a solution. There's only trade-offs, costs, and benefits. So right when they sold it to us as the way we solve it is doing this. Well, uh, I mean, is this the first? You're more or less saying that we've never had anything like this. We don't know what to do. It's like, no, we do have some things to compare it to. Yeah, lockdowns weren't justified then. They're not justified now. More or less, after about 70 days, the virus leaves a region, regardless of the amount of mask wearing and the amount of lockdowns. It certainly spreads. Yeah, so what if they develop a vaccine? There's still a flu vaccine. Doesn't exactly solve all of our issues. I don't think there's ever been a coronavirus vaccine. So, the lockdown narrative is just totally finished. But this is extremely damning psychologically, as you can see with a lot of the videos that are posted online of couples that haven't seen each other in so long, grandparents that see kids with their masks asking please remove it. And the whole thing is, well, we don't want to get sick because then we could give it to the elderly. It's not, sometimes it's healthier for the person to develop immunity by first getting it themselves. From what I've heard, that is simply just me going with a general consensus. So, yeah, terrible, damning psychological approach to the lockdowns, not just economical or the idea that if you show them that they could have this much power, they'll take it again in the future. This is the anti-lockdown material from a totally different angle.
Yeah, it is, and that's most of what I thought about when I was watching it today in prep for this episode. How bad the number one cause or the number one effect of the lockdown is that a lot of people feel lonely, and it's crazy that because one thing I always hear is that, oh, it's because of COVID that we can't see each other,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, and there's this there was something on Netflix, this documentary just came out about life during COVID lockdown, kind of watching that, and I'm sure you can see all the effects of what we just watched in that documentary. So,
Yeah, I did see this thing on Twitter. It was like the short video advertisement of dating during COVID. Here's how you can date on Zoom. Now, this is actually probably much safer as far as, you don't want to spend a ton of time with someone just to realize, oh, I wish I would have known this about them because then I wouldn't have spent any time or money or effort on them. So it's good in that sense. But the sense is, though, the idea that we're delegating in-person relationships to things that are more virtual is a little scary. And of course, when I hear when I hear them say, well, we might have to do virtual Thanksgiving this year, that's one where it's just so funny for me because I just I just feel like Michael Corleone when Kay says I'm gonna take the kids and he just goes, do you know that that is an impossibility? I could never let that happen. I do everything in my power to. That's just what I want to say to these doctors who talk to me about Zoom Thanksgiving. Imagine getting, dying of scurvy in the high seas in the 1400s, sailing across the Atlantic, getting all diseases just to go from one impoverished land to another, and being like, well, we can't celebrate any of this if there's ever, a virus with a 0.00002% of detected cases. That's according to Amy Klobuchar's own scare tactic numbers. So it's ridiculous. Um, yeah, virtual Thanksgiving, not a chance here.
so do we have any thoughts, any more thoughts about this topic? Do we want to get into the Harry Brown?
You know what? I actually am not sure what the Harry Brown topic you have. My final thing on this is I thought it was interesting where he said it's better to get a divorce than have a high confrontational marriage. I put high conf marriage. Is that conflict? High,
Yeah, conflict. Yeah.
yeah, high conflict marriage is what he said. I think it's always better to not be afraid of terms. Well, if this doesn't work out, that'll be a divorce. So we don't get divorced. It's like, don't be such a slave to tradition and titles, being like, okay, yeah, that's it. I'm a, let me tell you, I am a community college dropout, and that's rough to say. But, being able to link people to 520 free educational videos you could access at any time kind of lifts my spirits a little. So I've learned to not be so afraid of being looked down upon. I know a lot of people who had said, "Well, we'll have to get a divorce, and that'll just be so burdensome, and it'll hurt the kids." Let me tell you, my parents got divorced. I only really know divorce. I mean, they got divorced when I was like 2 years old or something. And as much as I would have preferred to live with my brother and sister under the same roof with parents, it's much better than these two parents in this marriage, because when they talk on the phone for 2 minutes today, it's like you've had 22 years to get over this. And it's like they're fighting for the first time and they haven't gotten anything off their chest and they're just as mad as ever. And then my favorite part is hearing each of them give their side of the story after it's all happened. It's just like the ultimate game theory of, let's talk to this prisoner and see what we could get out of him and leverage it over what this prisoner gives us. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, something like divorce, even though it's annoying and there's a sort of stamina against it. Well, first of all, have standards before you get married so you don't get divorced. But also, I mean, God, I hate seeing marriages that I'm just like, why are you two together? This is just sad.
In our system that we currently have is imperfect when it comes to divorce, of course, and there's a lot to get into the topics there. Maybe we could game that in a libertarian society it would be better, easier to get divorced and not have it be such with alimony and child support, more things to fight over, the equity of it.
Oh, of course. I mean, these courts have no incentive to provide a good product. I mean, how many people lose their jobs because they have divorces that are too costly that yield unhappy families who seek their business elsewhere? It's ridiculous. So, yeah, of course, more competition and voluntary funding and the ability to disassociate, or you might just stop living together and not have the obligations you previously had under it would just be like a contract. There's the marriage contract, and then you end the contract. Yeah, it's hard to get things settled, but certainly no justification for, whoa, this is complicated, so we need a coercively funded monopoly to come in here and set us straight. No, that's the biggest wrench you could throw into anything possible. What is the Harry Brown material?
Well, Harry Brown kind of touches on what we were talking about in the beginning, is that, if you are a libertarian, well, let me just play it. It's
Yeah,
good.
let's definitely play this. He has so much wisdom. He was actually the presidential nominee when Joe Jorgensen was his his running mate. He has had so many intellectual contributions. He even has a collection of 2,000 libertarian quotes that he put together, always in a suit and tie, always really coming across as someone I'm proud to be on the same team as. Do you have the video queued up?
I do. Yep, here it is. And
Yeah.
this is one that I haven't read his book, but I need to, because I've referenced it a few times in the show. But here we go.
That's when I started writing my own introductions. Freedom is the ability to live your life as you want to live it. There are all sorts of definitions of freedom, but that to me is the simplest and most direct and the most meaningful. That's what it comes down to. You want to control your own life. You want to live your life as you want to live it, not as George Bush or Bill Clinton or Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt or anybody else thinks is best for you. And not only not as they think is best for you, but as your friends think is best for you, or your relatives, or anyone else. And we think of freedom necessarily, most of the time, as being in relationship to the government, because the government seems to be the biggest inhibitor of our freedom, taking so much of what we earn every week, taking so much of our time consumed in dealing with regulations and rules that the government has set, taking so much control over our lives because of rules that it sets even on personal behavior, of what kind of medicines you can take, of what you can smoke and what you can drink and when you can do it and where you can do it, and all of these things. Obviously, we don't have a great deal of control over our own lives, so we think of that. But that's not the end of it. There is much more to it. We give up freedom in many ways voluntarily to people that we know, to obligations that we make, to society in general, so-called. We also give up freedom to people we deal with in many ways that we don't really need to. And libertarians understand a great deal about the relationship of freedom with regard to the state. And you can define libertarianism in many ways. I often say, when somebody says, what's a libertarian? I say, well, a libertarian is somebody who is really serious about reducing government to its absolute minimum. In other words, somebody who doesn't say, hey, we had a great victory because government only grew by 4% this year instead of 5%. Or, gee, we stopped that new welfare bill, or whatever it is. What a great victory for freedom. No, libertarians are serious about reducing freedom to its absolute minimum, whatever that may be. But to me, all of libertarian thought, and this is, again, something where you might arrive at a different formulation, but to me, all of libertarian thought stems from one simple principle, an obvious principle, and yet with so many ramifications. The principle is that everyone thinks for himself. Now, everyone does think for himself. Now,
So thoughts on Harry Brown? He gets into a bit more and he starts talking about freedom traps, and I've covered that in other episodes of the podcast. But thoughts on Harry Brown?
I thought it was great overall wisdom. As far the thing that stuck out to me was
He misspoke.
what was the date on that? May 4th, 2002. Is
Yeah,
that what it said?
something like that.
Yeah, but you have to put yourself back in, May 4th of 2002 to remember that this was a time just like now where they're saying, well, this is obviously why we need a government, because we were just attacked by fanatics. They're only going to increase for all we know. This is terrible. It's like, look, the people that are saying, well, we actually really need it because, look, there's a virus. Well, we really need it because social media companies engage in blatantly violations of contracts and agreement. Well, we need it because of the recession. Actually, we need it because of Saddam. Or we need it because there's big governments overseas. Or we need it because there's greed or there's racism or because there's inequality. Don't get discouraged to our fellow ideologues out there about, well, now it's so exhausting. No, it's always been this bad. It really has always been. And if he was able to, he did such a great job of leading by example in May of 2002 when the Democrats and Republicans were like, government, here's a blank check, just keep us safe. Not being able to think critically, of course. So yeah, I don't really have much else on that. I think he's a great member of the team, though.
Yeah, and I'll close on this is that it's about what you can control and what you can't control. And I've also talked about stoicism on the podcast before, and that's gained popularity amongst our circles. But it really is about why waste time and energy worrying and getting angry and upset about things that you have no control over. One of those things being what other people think, or how much the government grows, or what the government does, or what the government's reaction will be to COVID. I guess you can put your hat in the ring and try and do your part, but at the end of the day, you just got to focus on what you can control. And within your sphere of control, you can do a lot to increase your own freedom. And that's what agorism is about, but it's also what just being true and having a great family and great relationships is about too. So hopefully this episode was able to help you guys gain some perspective, help us gain perspective as well, Keith. But if you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out, patrick.mcfarland@libertyweekly.net. Post in the comments below. If you're going through something or want to chat or talk about your life or, during this time, feel free to reach out. Anything else, Keith?
Oh, I got nothing else.
Okay.
Harry Brown's always a good note to end on.
All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks for joining us, guys. Really appreciate it. Hope you're doing well, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.